So we're going to get started today. Again, please know that we are recording, and if you have any questions, please use the chat at this time, and we'll open up for other questions at the end of the presentation. I'd like to welcome you today. I'm Dina Kurzweil, and along with me is Dr. Linda McCauley. We're from the Education and Technology Innovation Support Office, and we're here today to talk to you about teaching in the new normal. Specifically, should it stay or should it go? And of course, because we work for the military, we have added a spunky acronym called SISOSIG, just to make it fun. So I tend not to read people information directly from slides. So if you could please take a minute to look at our session objectives, we'd greatly appreciate it. A lot of our objectives tend to really focus on you, participant, being able to reflect on pieces that we've talked about today, identify elements that we may be talking about, and actually being able to implement that wonderful SISOSIG framework that we're going to discuss today. So we're in what's called the new normal. What is that? There's a lot of literature about it, but believe it or not, we have a success story at USIS that we can discuss. So we really want to think about moving forward here at USIS. We had an opportunity with the COVID pandemic to rethink how we were teaching. Now, granted, we had to do it quickly last year. Everything we did was in a reaction mode, but we also had an opportunity to gain resources. So a lot of what we need to think about now, because we have the time, is how are we going to move forward and not go back to normal? Because there may be elements of what we did in reaction to the COVID pandemic that could actually improve or enhance our teaching and our students' learning. When we're doing that, we need to think about how deliberate we're being and how thoughtful we're being of our use of technology. A lot of people will say to me, well, I recorded my lectures and I think I'm just going to use those recordings from now on. And that is perfectly fine. But you want to think about what it means to use your lectures, how you're integrating your lectures. You want to strategically think about how you're going to solve problems or issues with the technology, the tools and approaches you use to support your department. And more importantly, you want to, next slide, Linda, have readiness at your hand for a future emergency or a future pivot. We've all heard about the new variant in COVID. We don't know what that's going to bring for the fall, but we really want to think about how we may have to go back and use these tools and what that means to actually maintain these tools. And believe it or not, it doesn't have to be COVID. This could be an emergency that you actually have that happens, unfortunately to you. It could be a sick child and you can't make it to class. It could be, a car breakdown. So you want to think about all of these pieces and resources that you've created and how they're going to support you for the long term. So what does that look like? We also need to think about our students. And this is an important piece to the puzzle because we need to think about how our students are actually able to access these materials all in one place. We want to think about how they're going to view, if you're using lecture recordings, how they're going to view those and what makes up those lecture recordings. I tend to tell people just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. We want to be intentional about what we're doing here, purposeful, and understand what it means for maintenance for the long term. Things like class chats or discussion or polling tools. We want to think about how those worked in the past and how we can use them in the new normal. What worked, what didn't work? Well, how do I make those decisions? How do I look at all my digital course materials and decide what should stay or what should go? So we have a framework here, next slide, to help you think about what should stay or what should go. And as I said, it's the SISOSIG framework.
And we're going to take time today to go through each of these components and give you some things to consider as you decide what should stay and what should go. So we'll start at the beginning with that first set of the framework, which is the inventory and the personal reflection component. And let's look at that a little bit more closely. So first off, as we've been talking about, we have all these things, these teaching tools, materials, and techniques that we've now been using for the last 18 months during this pandemic pivot. And we now need to take stock of that, take inventory. So recorded videos of your lectures, synchronous online classes, Google Meets, Zooms, doing online office hours and student support, teaching that whole student, right? What have we learned? What are we now doing to consider our entire student, the mental health, the conditions under which they are learning, or other things pulling at their time? Things like online discussion boards, online tests and quizzes, digital versions of all the things, of all the readings, of all the handouts, presentations, labs, simulations, case studies that we had to move online. All those things that we've been working with over the last 18 months, what do we have? What did I miss? What else? If you want to, you can open up that chat pod. What other things, what other teaching tools, materials, and techniques do you have that you know about? That you want to make sure you take stock of and decide if it should stay or if it should go. Did we miss anything in the list? So you're welcome to open up that chat pod and add that to the conversation as we consider the other components of this framework, and as we go through to make those decisions of what should stay and what should go. I'll keep my eye on that chat if you think of other things that are not on this list, so we can add that to the conversation to decide.
And sharing, just to have you think about this, sharing those things that we missed actually help the rest of us in this group think about things that we need to consider, because you may have a very unique perspective of what your resources were that somebody else may not have taken into consideration. So please, if it wasn't on the list, consider sharing it in the chat.
Okay. Right off the bat, as you start thinking about all these items that you have to decide if you liked it or not and why. And keep in mind that we have to make those decisions also based on the student perspective. So that earlier slide where Dina was talking about what students want, they want these digital materials. They want access to lectures to review at their own pace. So even though it might not be your most favorite thing to do, keep in mind that the students are actually asking for that, and what they say is the next part of the framework really is part of our decision-making process. Consider, does this item you're looking at support your objectives? Because if it doesn't, even if students want it, if it's not supporting your objectives, probably don't need to keep it. Does this teaching tool, material, or technique support your learning activities and content? If it does, we might have to think about keeping it or revising it so that we can keep using it because it makes sense in your course. And does that teaching tool, material, or technique support your assessment? Because we always are looking for alignment between objectives, your learning activities and content, and your assessment. And if the item that you're looking at and considering, does it stay or does it go, fits, if it's aligned and it fits, then it should more likely stay. And then what can you use now or in another emergency situation? We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to think about the fact that we might have to pivot back online for any reason. But since we have all this content and we now know how to do this, let's be deliberate and be intentional so that we're prepared for future. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be a pandemic. It could be something as simple as an emergency health situation where one day you're at work and the next day you're not. And if you have all your content prepared in a way that allows somebody else to take over because it's already digitized and it's already electronic, it's a whole lot easier for that switch to happen because nobody's prepared for that. But we need to try to do as best as we can to be ready for those emergency situations.
And a personal reflection is really, in this inventory phase, are not really meant to be something that you do all at once. You want to think about all your pieces over time. Give yourself time to really think about what is a tool, material, or technique that you've used that can help you if we need to pivot and help you in the new normal or if we have to pivot back.
Right.
And you also want to take time. And when I mean time is, you can reflect on all those things at once, but come back to that reflection, look at it again, take a different step in a different mind frame, because you may actually have a personal reflection on that tool, material, or technique that was different from where you first came to. You may have had a different experience in between. So give yourself the time to do this. You want to give over yourself to a personal reflection, but in doing so, you need to give yourself multiple chances to consider it.
So then the next phase of this framework involves these items here, and we're going to first start looking at the student piece, right? The student feedback and the student grades. So as you consider what do students say about those items that you now have in your list that you're reviewing? What do they say about the amount of work? There's been a good bit published about the pandemic pivot that students felt like they had more work to do when we were no longer in the classroom. As a global thing, I'm not speaking to a USIS specific study, but globally, students have reported that they had more what they felt were often was busy work, and in some respect, we felt that need to cover the seat time. So maybe they do think that there was more work to do because they weren't sitting in a classroom passive listening to a lecture. They actually had to do other things. Do the students say that they were engaged with that content? Was it useful to them? And then what do their grades and their performance on other learning activities tell you about their learning related to those items that you're reflecting on? There's definitely been some research this year that some grades are slightly higher when students have access to recorded videos of lectures over traditional classroom methods with similar interactivity. There's the key caveat there. So they help, they work. And also consider that deliberate planning of what you do face-to-face and what is online is really important to result in better student performance. So we didn't have a choice when we pivoted due to the pandemic, but now we do. So use this opportunity to be deliberate in your decision making and your planning so that you can design instruction for the best modality and the best learning outcomes. And then, does that teaching tool, material, or technique allow you to provide academic feedback to support student success? So just by nature of the artifact that you're looking at, does it allow you to be more deliberate or specific or consistent in that feedback to support student success? Consider it from the perspective of, in a large classroom, we can't possibly know what each individual student understands as we go through a lecture. But if we record something and now we have data coming out of the tool, we might truly be able to say, do they understand or not? The next phase is quality. Again, we pivoted overnight. Some of the things we've created may not fit the bill for quality. So consider, does it show the university or you in a professional, positive light? If it does, might be worth keeping. Think about copyright and accessibility issues. If there's any concerns there, now's the time to put it in your revise pile before we use it again. Does it provide digestible content? What we mean by that is chunking content into smaller pieces so students are more able to understand it. So one of the problems or concerns that came out of the pandemic is that everybody was sitting in Zoom meetings all day. So you had, 7-8 hours of Zooms. That's not very digestible. And we now literally have a term called Zoom fatigue because of it. So think about what you have, and maybe initially you did record a 45-minute lecture and it was one big recording. But now is your chance to look at quality and say, can I chop it up into chunks that are more digestible by theme, by topic, by subtopic, so that my students can more readily review it and also understand it?
And when you're dealing with videos especially, there are two methods in our current system that allows you to do that. You could create separate videos for each of your chunks of content. And Panopto also offers a chaptering feature, which would allow you to break it up within. And the help desk gentleman, Matt, and those guys the Panopto help guys can really help you understand how that tool works. But doing a chapter is going to allow your learners to actually look at those themes and go directly to those places where they may have a problem and want to go back again, as well as doing individual ones with specific names. It's about letting the students get the content in smaller chunks, but also allow them easy access to find things when they go back and look at it a second time. Also
right.
with quality, go ahead, Linda, sorry.
And well, the other piece too, related to all of this, is something called cognitive load. So our students are more able to stop and pause and rewind and rewatch if we provide them digital content, and it also allows them to not be overwhelmed, right? So if we can provide the content in digestible pieces that make sense to be together, they're more likely to understand because they don't get overwhelmed by too many things all at once. The other thing to think about with quality is, does it use active, interactive, or collaborative techniques? Because a lot of these online materials, as many of us have witnessed, if we start watching a YouTube video, after 3 minutes, we're not paying attention anymore. So what are we doing in these artifacts that you're looking at to keep the students active and interactive with you and the content, or with each other, to be collaborative so that they actually can understand and interact with the content in meaningful ways? Many of you have virtual case studies that you're using. So those are some great high quality ways to interact, but also keep it online.
So you can also, when you're thinking about interactivity and collaborative techniques, you can also look at your content and think about where you're pausing in a video. Are you asking and giving time for your students to reflect on a question at a specific point? You could ask them actually to pause, think about this, and put that in a chat, in a discussion board online, to make a note about it and send it as a Google Doc that maybe everybody has open. So that you can collect these thoughts and ideas, and it could give you a sense of what do my students know from the content and are able to do. I personally like having a Google Doc where I ask the students to watch the video with a Google Doc on the side, so that when I'm doing those pauses and asking those students to put in comments, I know exactly where that reflection piece came in and what the students said about it. And so it's going to give me a sense of where they are across the paradigm of learning.
Right. And the last piece of quality is, does it promote consistency? So this is one of the big value adds that I know several faculty have expressed to us over the pandemic, is that they created things that allowed for consistent feedback to students that before were in a classroom where, you might overhear something in a small group and make a comment to one group, but then you go to the next group and you hear a different piece of that and you give them a different comment. And by doing some of this virtually in an electronic form, the feedback and the content that was delivered to the students was consistent across groups or across sections. So that was another piece of a quality education for the students that came out, maybe indirectly, just by nature of moving this online. The next item in the framework is relevance. So are these things that you've created still relevant now that COVID is hopefully behind us? And if it is, then continue to use it. If not, let it go. Something to consider is, does the artifact you have allow students to see content that is too difficult, dangerous, or expensive to do in a lab or on their own? That's one way to keep using these electronic resources. And can it stand the test of time? So before you spend a lot of time revising and cleaning things up and making them better, are you going to be able to use it over again? So think about perennial content. So if it's something that you can use semester after semester because it doesn't change frequently, that's something good to keep or revise to keep for future. And also, can it be used by future generations of faculty or other departments? So here's something to think about as you record your lectures. Could somebody else use it when you have moved on to a different position that then takes over the course for you? If the talk is too specific to you, that might be difficult for somebody in the future to use. Something as simple as showing your video at the beginning of the session, turning your video off during the content of your talk, and then putting your video back on at the end to tie up loose ends and close out is a very simple strategy to allow your content to be used over and over again, even by other faculty who may teach the same course in the future, because then all they have to do is change their intro and outro, and the content stands this test of time and can be used over and over again.
And I also want to add, a lot of times you're going to talk about the current data in a presentation or a lecture, or you're going to have information that is more related to timely events. If you can take those pieces and set them up as their own little mini piece, then when those change, instead of having to redo an entire video or learn how to edit, you actually have the standalone piece that deals with the current data or the current plan that you can change when the approach changes. And it lightens the load. So instead of having to redo a 45-minute lecture because it was in the middle, you can break up that lecture, have that middle part its own little chunk, and then go on to the next part.
Right.
It just makes life so much easier for you if you start thinking in those terms of reuse. And to one of Linda's points about providing your image in the beginning and your image at the end, the research there is pretty solid that students do get distracted by seeing somebody talking while they're trying to listen and look at any type of PowerPoints or material. So consider that. I'm now watching somebody talk in the corner. I have this visual in front of me and I'm listening. And so really letting the students focus on the listening and viewing of something and putting your image off to just the beginning or the end is really going to help students take in that content in a more focused manner. Now, some people like it and that's perfectly fine, but the research does show it is not the preferred approach for our learners.
And one other note about perennial content, we tend to speak to our students that we're recording for at that moment. So you might say, hey, have a great summer break, or I hope you enjoyed the snow last week, or whatever. Avoid those kinds of references that would date your video to a certain class of students or a certain semester or a certain year, because then as soon as you say that, you can't use it again when it's a different season or a different time. So be careful of that. Use your written materials that you're using with the students and the announcements and things that you broadcast to connect with them in that way, and keep your recorded content not time sensitive. All right, the next item is the flexibility. So when we look at this, does the teaching tool, material, or technique allow for more flexibility in scheduling of class time or access to materials? So this is another one of those items that maybe we hadn't thought about before the pandemic, but now we realize, boy, we can schedule things so much better when we aren't always needing to be in a classroom together at the same time. Thinking about the times where you need to schedule lectures for other faculty to come in on your modules. Well, if it's recorded, as long as they have it done before the students are needing that information, it can happen anytime. And you don't have to worry so much about, getting everything to fit perfectly in your schedule, because now it's recorded. And also for students, access to the material, it gives them flexibility so that they can review and revisit content when it's convenient for them and when they have free time. And it definitely gives you more time in class for active learning or case studies, because they can consume that more passive lecture information on their own time. It also allows you to provide those virtual didactics or technical kinds of things recorded so that you don't have to keep repeating yourself. And the students can repeat the video instead if they didn't understand the first time, to make sure that they get the content that they need. And it also eliminates travel. Bethesda, by nature of the area, can have very congested roadways. So if there's opportunities for reduced travel, nobody's going to complain about that from an environmental or a time perspective. And then does it allow you to have more time to focus on important work or to be more efficient? So if that happens, if we can give back time to faculty and the students that we teach, why not? I'm all for that. And let's focus our time on what really matters.
One of the nice things about thinking about flexibility in your teaching tools is really taking the time to also look at what was said in your materials. Because if you are saying the same thing in your teaching tool, material, or technique that you've asked the student to read, you want to kind of think about that flexibility. And do I want them to actually have that twice? Well, what am I saying the exact same thing twice? Where am I actually dealing with flexibility here? And how am I actually looking at what goes where and why? So it's not just the individual pieces, but the larger pieces and how they all interconnect with one another that allows you to get more flexibility. 9 times out of 10, when I've worked with a faculty member to look at all this, stuff is actually removed because when we discuss it, it's actually in another place. And so instead of restating the entire thing, it's briefly brought up in a new piece or a revised piece and referred back to the original piece that had it. And so it's important because all of that plays into the flexibility. You know, you need to be thinking very critically about all of this.
And then the next phase of this framework is where we get down to the nitty-gritty and we start getting to the point where we need to make some decisions, because we have to think about our timeline and our resources. Because once we get all these items compiled and we work through if we think it's good or not for various reasons that we've discussed, then we get down to that, work-life balance and our unlimited time, or I should say limited time and resources, right? So how much time do you actually have to review and revise all this? We have to be reasonable and make sure we can actually do what we set out to do. It does take time to create all this content and edit it. I know I often tell people that 30 seconds of video could take 2 hours to edit if it needs a lot of cleaning up and a lot of changing. So keep that in mind as you are deciding what you're going to keep and what you're going to revise and what you're going to let go. And another factor here is, do the students or you need training or support to be successful with this artifact? Because if they might need help, it might determine if you keep it or you let it go, if you have an ability or resources available to do that training or support. And frankly, is there enough help for you to be able to complete this? If you've got faculty, colleagues, or ETI support to help you get this revised and used for future, then absolutely it can go in the yes pile. But if you don't have help to complete it and you don't have the time available, then it might have to be let go, at least for now, or put on a hold pile for future.
You also, when you're dealing with your timeline and resource picture, want to remember you don't have to do it all at once. Right. Just like we talked about chunking content, you can actually look at that list you've created and say, which pieces give me the most bang for the time I'm going to spend on it, and actually start working through that by prioritizing all your content. But you need to think about the fact that you don't have to do this all at once. It could be a multi-year phase planned for you, but you got to start somewhere.
Right. And that's the bottom line of prioritization, right? Is it worth revising to make it better? If it is, then you have to start prioritizing what gets done first and what gets pushed to later. One of my early teaching experiences, the leadership there told us, make one lesson awesome every day. So maybe you can use that as your background thought process. One thing, awesome. And then the other things happen later. And then after a couple of years, everything you do is awesome, right? Because you've addressed something every day that you need to improve. And think about, does it provide opportunities to develop real world transferable skills? Those are the things you want to put higher on your priority list, because obviously we want to train our students to be successful in the real world. And does it improve or maintain connectedness of the student to you, the instructor, to students and their other peers, or to the students and the content of the course? And if it does, if you can say yes to that, then you want to keep it higher on your list, because those are the things that ultimately result in better student performance and outcomes when they are more connected in these three ways. And then, does it help you develop a backup plan? Because as we mentioned earlier, we all don't want to have to pivot again, or we all don't want to have some kind of an emergency that might make us not be able to be where we're supposed to be at a given time for class. So ultimately, though, if we have that backup plan, we are prepared, and it will be less stressful for everyone involved if we've used these artifacts as a way to have that plan B ready to go if we need it. So once you do all this prioritization, what makes your list? To keep as is, keep it but revise it, or let it go. That ultimately is our framework. And once you get to that list, now you actually have to do it. You have to implement it. So focus on your efforts that improve instruction. Things like effective communication, multiple modes for content, and things that improve student support, and also that help you have meaningful evaluation for your students to know what they know and what they can do. And if you go through all of that, then we realize that this process repeats, and you definitely go back through and constantly, continuously improve. So when we put up the graphic in a few moments, again, you'll see there's that arrow that goes back to the beginning, because we always have to keep repeating this process to have quality instruction. So first, we plan what we're going to do, what, where, why, and how. And we, again, go back to that alignment of objectives, learning activities, content, and assessment. Then we do it, we implement it, and then we go back and we examine and study, how did it go? So that's what we're looking at right now, right? We're studying how it went the last 18 months, and what are we going to keep, and what are we going to get rid of, and then act, decide how to proceed for the future, either keep it, revise it, or let it go. And that, in a nutshell, is our framework. Before I switch and show you that slide again, I do want to just show real quick, because I know there was a comment in the chat to me privately about this concept earlier about an alignment matrix. And I am not sure that you are all seeing that alignment matrix. Dina, can you confirm?
Yeah, I'm seeing page 1. You probably need to scroll down to see the action.
Okay. So an alignment matrix is, a course alignment matrix is an idea that you could use to help in this planning process, where you align your learning objectives, your learning activities, and the assessment activities that you do to the overall course objectives week by week or unit by unit. And it's just a little chart, as you can see, and it does take time to figure this out. But if you are deliberate about thinking about measurable learning objectives and the activities and assessments that students are going to engage with to meet those objectives each week or each unit of your course, there will be better outcomes. And it might also help you prioritize then which activities you should pay attention to, because it's a part that maybe wasn't quite where it needed to be as far as alignment goes in your course. You could make it better. My favorite question to ask faculty is, what's driving you crazy? what's not working. That's where you want to fix things. That's where you want to look at this alignment and make sure it's there. That's where you want to make sure the resources do what you wanted them to do. And if it's not quite there, that's where you should focus your attention, because it's already not working. So let's do something to make it better. And then I'm going to go ahead and put the graphic back up so you can see the whole thing all together. Dina, before I move to concluding thoughts, do you have anything else you wanted to add about the overall framework or anything that I missed?
No, Linda, I think you did a really great job helping show that. We don't have a ton of people. And so after Linda provides the concluding thoughts, we're going to put some links in the chat of some resources that may help you. If you're interested in having a copy of this framework, please just email us at eti@usis.edu and let us know you'd like a copy of it. Because obviously you can't walk away with it, and some of you don't have access to all of our Google Suites, so we can email that directly to you. And then once we show these concluding thoughts, we're going to open up the mics so that you can unmute yourselves and go ahead and ask us some questions. So nice final piece here to consider. Again, we're not going to read it. Take a second or two and consider this based on what we've just discussed.
So we open up the mic. How are you going to do this? Or chat. You can type your responses, or you are welcome to open your mic and speak.
Yeah, so some of you I know out there. So anybody want to share? Was this helpful? Let's start with that. Can I get any thumbs up or thumbs down if this was helpful or not that helpful? I assume if you were if you stayed on for the whole thing, it was a little bit helpful. All right, I got one thumbs up. Are there any questions? Anything we can answer? Any concerns or thoughts? Please
Hi, this is Dr. Parker. Can you hear me?
Yes, I sure can, Dr. Parker. Thanks.
Fantastic. I'm on leave, so I'm not able to put on my video. But my question was about the video in the corner of the recording, because when we record right now in ETI, most of the output comes out with that video in the bottom right corner. And from what I had heard from the students, they actually like that because they get the visual cues of when a presenter is kind of really excited about the content or something. So they focus in on that more. So that kind of goes a little bit differently from what you were saying based on the research. So I'm wondering, has that been something that's come up? Because some of our, I guess early on, at least in the recording process, we had heard that they actually do want that video.
Sure.
So I'm just kind of curious because I'm working on recording a few more lectures recently. So I was like, well, should I put that in there or not?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, it's like any educational research piece in terms of student perspectives. It depends on who you're asking and the situation. The research I was referring to had an overwhelming amount of student feedback saying that they thought it was distracting. Now, I'd have to go back to look and see exactly what the content was. But if your students like it, keep it. I mean, that's one of the things you get to think about right now. And it's an opportunity for you to actually ask your students, did you like this? Think about putting that in your end of course survey or course questions. Did you like seeing me? Didn't you like seeing me? You know, was it helpful to have me in the corner? And don't be surprised if it changes year by year. Because you're going to have a different group of students every year.
Absolutely. There's always a different cohort with different expectations and opinions.
Right.
And you may find, even if you reflect just on this past year, students may say they wanted to see you because they needed human contact, right? Because they were stuck in their own homes without interacting with anyone. So this year they may have actually said, yes, please, I want to see you the whole time because it's the only time I saw an adult human being. I certainly had those moments over the last year. But you're right. I think it depends on the content. If the research, there's been some more recent research that definitely says it can be distracting if it's very complex content. So if the content that's on the slide is very intricate, it could be distracting to try to pay attention to the speaker and what's happening on the screen. If it's conversation like we're having right now, put your video on, because I don't really need to be looking at a particular piece of that slide at the moment that we're talking. So it's less likely to be distracting. There are some resources that are being placed in the chat for you that you might find useful. And I can also just plop them up here on the slide. That if you would like to look at those for more details and more support as you're considering all these items that you have created, it is available to you.
Thank you so much for that. Go ahead. No, I'll ask my question afterwards.
No. I was just going to say, you can copy and paste everything in the chat and then stick it in another place so you have it for later. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. The other question was about the Google Sheet. As you were discussing, if you have a specific topic, you have a Google Sheet up. I was wondering if we can see an example of how you would be kind of implementing that.
That I would be happy to show you that at another date and time, but it involves directions for the students to prepare properly. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the key pieces. Is you're going to say to the students, before you watch this video, basically open up the following link and answer the questions. It's a shared document with all your students, so you'll be able to see who said what. They don't even need to put their names in it, because you'll be able to track that and look at it over time. You'll know what date they added it. It makes it nice and easy to see where they're going, but it's all in the directions you give them for that video in advance.
Okay.
And if you wanted it to be something private, if you wanted it to be something private that they can't see what everybody else said, you could use a question, a Panopto question, or you could.
Or what about a Google form?
Yep.
Yeah,
or a Google form.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay. Or you can use SurveyMonkey. You have lots of tools to kind of add that interaction with the students. And it's, it's a great tool to have, even when a lot of people don't think about it, but I used to use it before video became so easily with readings. So I had directions on a particular reading a student had to go to. I knew there were problems with students actually obtaining that information. And in the directions, it said, hey, when you get to chapter 5, page 32 of this book, I want you to go over here and answer these questions for me. So there are lots of ways to kind of integrate a little bit more activity into this. And to be quite honest, our students, we have to remember that our students are getting a lot of these types of interactivity in their earlier years now. So despite what we may think, our K-12 counterparts are doing all this. They're being taught to do all this. Linda teaches at another university, and I know she teaches her students to do this. And I know from other colleagues at other universities, this is par for the course for the K-12 environment. So we have an opportunity to build on what they've already had our students become accustomed to.
And maybe we didn't highlight this necessarily specifically, but something that I'll use a term called app smashing, but it's really combining multiple things at once. So what Dina's talking about, watching a video while you are taking notes collaboratively, for example, on a Google Doc, is that idea of app smashing, where you're combining two different technologies to accomplish your goals. So again, going back to those objectives, if the activity and the content meets your objective, then you're on par. So if your goal is for them to interact with that content and actually comprehend it, then doing something with a separate tool to make sure they're actually interacting with the content will help you meet that objective.
And again, happy to talk to you offline, schedule some time to discuss it and show you opportunities.
Right,
thank you so much.
Remember, you're not alone. I mean, the ETI is set up to support faculty with the teaching of students in new and innovative ways. And that's what we're really here to do.
So we appreciate it. This was a fantastic talk. Thank you.
Oh, our pleasure. And remember, we will be sending out video links to this from Panopto. You do need single sign-on to access Panopto, and I am working with External Affairs to figure out a way to get this out to everybody. Also, please mark your calendars for the end of July, as we will be having our next teaching with technology piece on looking for image resources, specifically finding anatomy. So I hope Dr. Brannick can make it on the 28th because I know she teaches anatomy.
And we also have a post-session survey that we would appreciate your feedback on today's talk that we will make sure we put into the chat. And there you go. So if you don't mind taking a few minutes to fill that out for us, that will help us provide high quality talks in the future as well.
I'll be sending out reminders, obviously, as you got for this piece, probably in the next week or so about the next Teaching with Technology piece. And we're co-doing this actually with the LRC. Even if you don't teach anatomy, this will be a great opportunity for any type of imagery you may need. Doesn't have to be anatomy. This will really help you open up the opportunities for free, cleared, copyright-free images. And remember, we're going to record it so you can share it out with others who do have single sign-on. Again, eti@usis.edu if you have any questions.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.